happy to be here. And I'm
Me
so
too.
happy to be here with you, girl, because I have been such a huge fan of your work for so long.
That means so much to me because you've been one of the most visible folks in our community, and
Wow, thank
you've
you.
always like held your values so close to the sleeve.
Thank
so I
you.
appreciate that.
Thank you. I guess I wanted to ask you what misconceptions around trans people that you feel desperately need to be rectified.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the biggest thing is that folks often think that we are some like satellites just like floating in the distance. They don't consider oftentimes that, for instance, as a Black trans woman, I have a family who are always engaged with my life and I'm engaged with theirs. So I think that's one of the misconceptions. And then I guess the other piece is that, you know, yes, we're brilliant, amazing, fabulous folks, but this gender stuff is something that we're all holding. And so, yes, you may think in a lot of ways that being trans or being non-binary is so sparkly and magically different. In some ways it is, because, you know, we know how to work a room. But everyone is dealing with some gender expectations that they probably fall short of meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's a very exhilarating time because we are starting to have language and further conversation around gender. But at the same time, think about these anti-LGBT legislation. And so while, you know, it is so disheartening, I try to recontextualize it as actually just a death rattle in response to the fact that things are radically changing and quickly, you know.
Talking about us living at the end of the world, like it feels like right now with all of the anti-trans legislation, of which there's hundreds of bills moving across the country. If you're gauging it based on legislation or protection, we've always lived at the end of the world as trans and non-binary folks. And look at what brilliance we continue to create, you know? And I think that at the crux of how we protect and defend trans and non-binary youth is that we don't let the world stifle that fire. You know, we've got to defend that brilliance that just organically exists in all of us without putting each other in these boxes that just don't fit.
I think what I've learned from my queer community is how critical it is to think about oppression in degrees, you know? So centering those who are in the most precarious positions first, you know, because the legislation is not going to do it. Can you speak to why it's dangerous for us to be using phrases like "don't say gay" when we're talking about this legislation that affects, you know, all members of the LGBT community, but particularly trans people and children?
Yeah, I mean, you said it all right there. I mean, I think a lot of times in our social justice movements, we can get away from nuance because once we get a message out there and it gains some traction, you know, you get that bit of validation and you're like, okay, well, this is working, so let's just keep doing that. And then you ignore the fact that you've pushed aside groups of people. There's still this ongoing epidemic of violence plaguing mostly Black and brown trans women. You know, you still have now all of these pieces of protection that were not fought for as fiercely as they should have been. And now we're seeing this on the other side with all the trans youth under attack in these ways. So I think it's about us always continuing to have nuance and knowing that nuance is hard. When you're talking about womanhood, for instance, and we're talking about the feminist movement, right? If we're fighting for gender liberation, honey, you know trans women exist, so don't act like we don't. You know that non-binary and gender fluid folks and gender non-conforming folks exist, so we've got to keep the nuance all the time, especially when it's really hard. I mean, you're a creator to the core. You are an actor, you're a musician. I'm always interested, like, what has it been like for you to kind of navigate being so visible as a non-binary person of color for all of these years? And particularly in Hollywood, you know?
Ooh, don't get me started on that part. It's definitely strange navigating the media, dealing with pronouns. There have been moments in time in which my immediate community, which is all gays, has just kind of innately used they, them pronouns for me, but I've been afraid or timid to figure out how to use that within a professional environment. Trying to, embody your truest self actually can put you in a position of more discomfort, And so navigating that has definitely been really complicated at times. And what has it been like for you as a transgender organizer to be a part of LGBTQ movements and feminist movements?
It has been difficult, but I think at the core, finding your community is key. And also just acknowledging that privilege and oppression are not binary experiences. Let's talk about binary, right?
Yes.
Like, we're on a sliding scale, honey,
Yes.
depending on what
Degrees.
room you're in or who's in this collection of folks that you're in that moment. You may be more privileged, you may be more oppressed.
So you created a 13-point framework to end the epidemic of violence against trans women.
The point that I really wanted to make with the Trans Obituaries Project was that there are trans people, particularly of color, who are moving work on all of these things. So we need y'all to tap in. We don't need any saviors. We need you to tap into what we've been doing, tap into the conversations we've been having, and support it. What does liberation look like to you?
Liberation to me means actively working against that structure in order to recenter and afford the people who have not historically been afforded the love they deserve, the love that they deserve. Yeah.
Wow.
That's liberation.
Beautiful.